Welcome to the State of Education with Melvin Adams. I am your host, Melvin Adams, and today we are going to focus on rural education. My guest is Dr. Robert Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is an assistant professor in the Department of Leadership, Research, and Foundations at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. He received his PhD in global education from The Ohio State University and focuses on rural schools in the United States and around the world, teaching and learning in remote locations. As part of his work with rural education, he serves as a classroom teacher for several remote school districts in the eastern plains of Colorado. He has presented at academic conferences in Australia, the United States, Morocco, Iran, Egypt, Brunei, Canada, Portugal, and Bahrain. His recent work has been published in the Rural Educator, the International Academic Forum Journal of Education, and Action in Teacher Education. Dr. Mitchell, it's a delight to have you join us on the podcast today. Welcome to the studio.
Melvin, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and happy to speak with you for a little while about the great things going on in rural schools.
That's awesome. And I'm excited to hear about it, as I'm sure our listeners are. So as we start, though, we've kind of shared your bio, but would you take a few minutes and just tell us a little bit more about you personally, your family and your background, or whatever you want to share with us, just so that our audience gets to know you a little better and understands your personal perspective, the things that motivate you and drive you and have led you into this path of life?
Sure. I grew up in Colorado, and I finished school in rural part of Colorado. In Colorado, we have two different types of rural. We have cowboy boot rural, and we have ski boot rural. So I grew up in ski boot rural, so where it snowed all the time, and loved growing up and going to a small school and living in a small community where you know everybody, and you come to the post office, and that's where everybody gathers. I eventually went on to college, very big school, and kind of bounced around. I've done various jobs. I worked for the railroad for quite a while. I worked in finance. But at the end of the day, I ended up going into teaching because it seemed to be what I was always coming around to. All my finance work had an education connection to it. Even when I was with the railroad, there's an education connection to it. So I took the plunge, and actually I was a teacher in Los Angeles Unified School District, a huge school, about 6,000 kids. Really had classes of 60, 70 kids and only 30, 40 desks, so it kind of made it a little more interesting.
Wow.
Eventually, going back to school, and then I had the opportunity to come back to Colorado and be part of the process that's going to help improve education across our state. Like all states, Colorado has some challenges with education, and I was lucky enough to work for the government and really analyze and look at what we could do to make things better. So I live here now with my wife, and I do have a teenage son who's now off to his first year in college. So I'm an empty nester, which means I get our kitchen table back again, which is great. When I'm not driving around the state, I do still ski quite a bit. And I got to tell you, hiking in Colorado in the summertime is pretty close to heaven.
That's beautiful country out there. In fact, my dad grew up in Colorado Springs, and so still have some family in that area, just on a personal note. So thank you for being with us today and sharing. So really, okay, you kind of started out in ski boot country, as you put it. I think you're really focusing now in the more of the cowboy boot part of Colorado. What sparked your interest in rural education?
It's granted, growing up in resort areas is very different than it is in the small agricultural towns. We know that. But yet there's also a lot of commonalities. There's a strong connection to community. There's a strong connection to individual relationships. Really, I got involved in rural education when I first came back to Colorado. I met with the HR people from all the school districts. And if you really want to know what's going on in a school district, talk to the HR people. They know it. And I said, what's the biggest problem we have in Colorado? And I was expecting to hear, our urban schools are a mess and we have violence. But they all looked at me and said, to be honest with you, our rural schools are falling apart. And I
Mm.
took that to heart, and I literally went on a tour, and I toured all 178 school districts around the state. In some of the rural school districts, it was really shocking. We
Mm.
saw walls that were starting to come down. There's a couple schools that had to wear a hard hat for my own safety. And it made me realize that while in Colorado, like a lot of other states, the majority of our people live in the big cities, in the major metropolitan areas, and those that don't live in a very different world. And so
Yeah.
I started getting involved, and the superintendent I work with, she'll tell you I just showed up one day and I never left. So they fed me lunch, and I think that was their mistake. But I've been working now at a small rural school for about 7 years, and I got to tell you, it's the best part of my week, my day, my year.
Mm. Well, that's good to know. You know, as I observe, it seems like, of course, Colorado, but I think we're seeing this all across the country. Part of it, and I'm making this kind of a statement, but also a question. So many of our more rural communities have experienced such a vacuum of talent and brain trust and so forth that's gone into the cities or into other regional areas where they think they'll have more opportunity, and often they do. But that has left many of the rural communities just almost devastated, particularly when it comes to leadership and so many things. You've got your core community people, those that have been there forever, but the younger generation are leaving. And along with that, a lot of times, teachers and stuff that have been there forever, they retire out, and people just aren't staying. Is that what you're seeing?
To a degree, for sure. And, we live in such a changing time between COVID and remote work. I'm starting to see a little bit more pickup of people saying, hey, living in the city is not all that great stuff. It's really expensive, and I can have a
Mhm.
much bigger house as long as there's internet connection and Amazon still delivers, and it does. One of the bigger challenges that we have all across the country is actually, although we're in rural areas and you think big, wide open spaces, housing has become a huge problem. And the reason why is there's obviously many factors, but one of the big ones is the older population, they're not in a hurry to leave their homes. We're not seeing the turnover in homes. And so when young people, even if they do want to come back, it's very difficult because there's nowhere for them to live. So part of
Mhm.
the process of this, of revitalizing, rural communities in schools, is about dealing with some of the bigger challenges. And we know housing is a huge challenge all over. Every single state has housing challenges.
Yeah. So uh, you've been involved in education while your focus is rural education. Let me just ask this question. What significant differences do you see between rural and urban or suburban schools?
That's a great question, because we look at it on the outset and it looks the same, right? You have a teacher talking to a class, and the kids are learning, and then we'll give them a test and we'll see how much they learned. And, it is the same thing in the rural schools, but how they go about it is significantly different. Um, in our urban and suburban schools, we're dealing obviously with larger student populations.
Mhm.
And for example, my son, he graduated from a high school with close to 4,000 students, and he had a great experience, and I have no complaints. But he didn't know a lot of his teachers, and his teachers certainly didn't know him.
Yeah.
When you go to a smaller community, you understand how ingrained everything is. The school I'm currently working at, we have 34 kids, pre-K through 12. I know every single one of those kids. I know what the parents are like. I know who they're dating. I know what sports they're really into. And I'm able to do that because we are in a smaller community.
Yeah.
I can tailor things for them. Now, I'm obviously biased. I'm a very pro rural education person, but I think the best education in the country going on right now is in our rural schools, simply
Mhm.
because we can build those connections and kids don't fall through the cracks. They're not allowed to.
That's a great statement that you just made. And I think, a lot of times let me just say it this way or ask this question. So, because there is so much family and community engagement, and kind of like you said earlier, everybody meets the post office and everybody knows everybody's business. It's kind of like, you know, these kids have a network all around them to some extent. And I realize that, kids can fall through the cracks in rural communities as well as they do in urban communities. But by and large, the family unit may be stronger, maybe not. Speak to us a little bit about that, because often we find that, it's kind of, in fact, recently did a podcast with a gentleman. He was making a strong case that you don't have failing schools, you have failing communities. Because what's going on in your community ultimately feeds right into your schools. And you're not going to have successful students if you have total dysfunction at home and in the community. Speak to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, when kids come to school and they can't learn because something's going on at home, it's a problem. In the rural communities, it's takes on a different form yet again. Yeah, we know all the parents. I can tell you where they work, and you see them out and about, and you better wave to them when you're in the truck, otherwise they're going to be talking about you at the next church meeting.
Yeah.
The concern that you have in the rural schools is when things go wrong, it's highly visible. It's highly visible because there's so few kids. So if there
Mhm.
are issues of abuse and neglect, it really stands out, and it kind of ingrains in people's minds. It's not more common, it's just more visible.
Yeah.
The other unique piece is that families, I mean, quite a few of my students are related to each other. Quite a few parents work at the school and their kids go to school. You never have behavior problems with those guys because the mom's right down the hallway, right?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it's tightly knit, and we know everybody, and we know the good and the bad and the ugly. And guess what? They know all that about you as well.
So what I've heard you say is that, these are great schools to work in, uh, but it's also a very needy area in most states, and as your experience in Colorado. Am I hearing you say that there's opportunity in places like this for great teachers who are just totally frustrated with what's going on at their present workplace, with some of the uh, violence and some of the total chaos and stuff that particularly urban and suburban school teachers are often facing? Are there places like this that would welcome teachers like this?
Absolutely. Let's pretend you're a podcast host in Virginia, and you're interested in becoming a secondary math teacher in rural Colorado. I will bring you out here. I'll take you on the tour. We'll buy you lunch. We'll provide housing. But yeah, the opportunities are there. And I always, because I'm working at both the university and the high school level, you can make such a huge difference, especially in the smaller schools. The
Hmm.
impact that you have on these kids it's immeasurable. It's
Hmm.
gigantic. That being said, there are some real challenges as well. I mean, to a 22-year-old living out in a place where there's nothing to do on the weekend can be a little less than exciting. But
Yeah.
the benefits, especially that we're now seeing, schools are now starting to provide housing for folks. So let's think about the $1,500, $2,000 a month you'll be spending on rent in the city. Now that's gone, right? You're still not going to be rich as a teacher, but we tend not to think about, what are the true benefits.
Hmm.
Plus, I'll be like perfectly honest with you, if you're creative, you can find just as much stuff to do. So yes, I'm looking forward to you coming out here, and I'll take you on a tour. And how is your trigonometry? That's the big question.
There we go. So that's a great question for any of the teachers who may be listening in today. So there's great opportunities out there, and because we hear from teachers often that are just frustrated and they are ready to quit, but they don't know where they can go and they're not ready to retire.
I've taught in big cities, and I know the challenge. I know you have some kids that just get on your nerves. My biggest classroom management problem that I've had in the last 6 years is I had one student that refused to take his hat off one day. That's it. There's no threats of violence. There's no disrespect. There's nobody cussing at me in the corner, which happens in suburban and urban schools. I'm treated like a professional, not only by the teachers and the community members, but the students themselves.
Mhm.
If you're really looking to teach and not be a police person and manage the class, rule is definitely the place to go.
Wow. A lot of people are going to be listening to that. We'll have to make sure they get your contact information later. But here's the reality, and I'm hearing what you're saying, and I believe that you're absolutely spot on. There are so many communities that are looking for good teachers, and there's plenty of opportunity for people. They just have to think out of the box and be willing to move to another location, perhaps. But like you said. They can wear cowboy boots out there.
Yeah, heck, you can have a cow if you want as well.
There you go. All right, so let's get back on track here. We're having a little too much fun, I think. But honestly, that does have a lot of appeal to some people, and I certainly would enjoy that kind of stuff myself. So today, you're speaking to parents, community leaders, educators, and probably even some legislators. What practical advice can you give to them to empower their engagement toward positive outcomes for our rural schools?
We understand that in the whole scope of the political realm, the big cities tend to get the attention. And in Denver, we always say when Denver sneezes, everybody gets a tissue. Same idea.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the big things that we see is we need to reconceptualize really what public education is. And I know everybody talks about this, but I'll give you my example. I'm a professor at a university, a public four-year university, but there's a teacher shortage, and we know that across the board. So for the last 6 years, I get up in the morning on a Monday and I hop in my car and I drive the 4 hours and I go teach in the school all day Monday and all day Tuesday, and then I'll do remote Wednesday, Thursday. But I'm a high school teacher as well. Getting out of these silos of, oh no, that's what the university does, that's what the high school does, that's what the elementary school does. We need to kind of break those down. We need, and to be perfectly honest and self-focused, it's made me a much better professor because I'm obviously teaching high school kids all the time. My slang has gotten much better. But we need to start rethinking about, I'm teaching college level courses at the high school. That's a great thing. It's a great thing for the kids. But why are we so resistant to get higher ed involved in these type of things? Higher ed needs to be part of the conversation, not a standalone. And I really think that we're missing the boat on a lot of things. There's no reason why every college, and especially public college and university, doesn't have faculty working in a high school, middle school, elementary school. It absolutely should happen, but yet it doesn't.
Well, that's true. At the end of the day, education is ultimately about the growth and success of students. Uh, can you share one of your favorite student success stories?
Yeah, I have a couple come to mind. Last year, we had a graduating class of 4. This year's a graduating class of 2. But one of the 4 last year, really fascinating guy. He didn't have a math teacher all through high school because we don't have a math teacher. We haven't had one for 8 years now, full-time math teacher. And so he taught himself math and really took it upon himself to learn as much as he could. And it's challenging. Imagine a 16, 17-year-old. Imagine yourself. Are you self-disciplined to learn, calculus on your own? No. But he was able to do it. And it really showed that he was able to take matters in his own hands and fix things. He was offered a full ride scholarship to Rice University, which he jumped at because that's where he wants to go. The second one, I think, it was more recent, and it's for a gentleman who college is not his thing. He's not into college. He's going to community college because he wants to be able to help on the farm or on the ranch, and that's going to help him a little bit. But I recently, 2 weeks ago, we hopped on a plane and I brought him to Portugal with me to speak at an academic conference. for two reasons. One, he'd never been overseas. He'd only seen the ocean once in his life before. But two, give him the confidence and understand that there's a whole nother world out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the challenges we have in our rural areas especially is we are isolated. So we don't get the global perspective. We don't interact with people that don't look like us, talk like us, worship like us. And so sometimes those kids are at a disadvantage. But you know what? At the end of the day, I would put up the rural kids against any other student across the country. They are that good.
Yep. I'm with you 100%. With you 100%. And so you've talked about inviting folk to come out to the rural schools, but one question people may have is, what about salary? Because, can I make it out there if I've got a very small class, if I've got, a poor school district, what's my salary? Am I going to be able to make it? Can you talk to us some about that and some of these kind of initiatives that you may be able to help with?
This is currently our biggest battle across the state. And Colorado is an extreme example. We have some unique state laws, but we also have the lowest paying school district in the country. Teachers at the school district I work at, we start at $27,500 a year. After 15 years and a couple of master's degrees, you will top out at $43,000 a year. That's the most you can make.
Wow.
And people think, rural sides are cheaper to live. Housing is a little bit cheaper if you can find it, but think about everything else. Gas is more expensive and you have to drive farther. You have to drive 20 miles to go to the store. Insurance is more expensive because there's less providers. You can't drive a Prius in rural areas. So you can have a truck and you're not going to get base. And you can see how this spirals. We have been working very, very hard to try to get our legislators to understand that we do need to figure out an option because, again, if I was to go down the street in suburban Denver, I could get a job that makes $85,000 tomorrow. Mm-hmm. If you have a choice between $85,000 and $27,000, guess which one people are going to go to?
Sure.
So the good teachers are going to the have districts and kind of the leftovers are going to the have-nots. And it's not fair for the kids. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the kids that are really kind of suffering through this. We've been working on trying to set a minimum salary in Colorado, and it's been tough. And I understand. I mean, every school district kind of has its own deal. But I did a study when I was working for the state, and I've discovered that if we had paid if every school in the state paid a minimum of $78,000 a year, which is a pretty big chunk of money, we don't have teacher shortages anymore. Those folks that would be great teachers that don't even consider it because of the salary now begin to consider it. And we start to see a big change. And I see it at the university level, because I'll be perfectly frank with you, we take all comers. If you're breathing and you can put a couple sentences together, we'll put you in a teacher preparation program. We are desperate. We're not filtering out a whole lot of folks. And the reason why is because finding people that can be willing to work for such low salaries is rough, especially in the rural areas. They just can't offer that much. So instead they do things like, we'll offer you free housing. Well, all of our rural schools run on 4-day weeks right now. So teachers get their weekends back. They still work on Fridays. They have to do lesson planning and grading, but they actually get a Saturday and Sunday off, which is kind of nice. So we've had to be creative, and I think it's worked out well, but it's not the long-term solution. We're great at Band-Aids in education, as you know, but the big solutions are much, much tougher to come by.
Sure. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and as we kind of wrap up today, just maybe there's a question I didn't ask you or something you really want to make sure people understand. Here's your chance.
I think my takeaway is I often get a lot of people ask me, why in the world would you get up so early and drive 4 hours? I have to bring donuts with me all the time because the nearest donut shop is 200 miles away. So why do you do it? And I could say all the things, it's important and it's links, but it's the kids. The best part of my week, the best part of my day is working with the kids day in, day out, helping kids understand everything there is. I'm teaching them U.S. history now, and we're really going into depth about World War I and the causes and what's the U.S. response. talking about countries they've never heard of, or they've heard of but don't really understand. We need to continue to work with these kids, because I'm telling you, the future, if the rural kids are indicative of our future, we're in really good shape coming forward. I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to figure stuff out because they're smart, they're motivated, and I don't care what anybody says, millennials are lazy, all that stuff. The kids I teach, they are rock solid.
Wow. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and we do have some great people across this country. The real salt of the earth are a lot of times out there uh, in that flyover country where people aren't really even, in the real packed coastal areas and so forth. Most people don't even think about those people, but they are the heart and soul, really, of this country in many ways. And it is so important that we do make sure that those children have opportunities to be properly educated, just like everybody else.
Yeah, I'll put on my salesman hat and I'll ask you, what would it take for you to come out to Colorado and come teach with me? Because truly, I beat the drum everywhere I can. If you want to come, field trip is on me. We'll take care of you. One of my students named Chloe, she's just learned how to castrate steers. She can give you a lesson and everything you need to know. But
That's
you know,
fantastic.
we need folks, and you know what? If it takes me literally pulling people off the streets and dragging them down there, then that's what I'll do.
That's awesome. I love your heart. I love what you're doing. Thank you for doing it. You're making a difference in some kids' lives. And, at the end of the day, it's not always the quantity that counts, it's the quality. And God bless you for what you're doing. Thank you for joining us today.
I've appreciated talking to you. It's been fantastic. Thank you.